Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Thank you. Members, we have a presentation this morning to recognize Joanne Campbell on her retirement as Executive Director of the Toronto Police Services Board. I would like to call upon Mayor Tory to come forward for the presentation.
Just making sure the scroll is there. Good morning, Madam Speaker and members of Council. And I want to say how pleased I am today to be able to join with you in celebrating a great career that has happened perhaps outside of the walls per se of this building, but has been something that's been incredibly important to the well-being of this community, and that is the career of Joanne Campbell, in particular her role as Executive Director of the Toronto Police Services Board. And make no mistake, I think even, and Ms. Campbell's here with us today, she's sitting right over there. Just wave your hand, Joanne, for those who don't know you. And she's joined by a number of people from the Police Services Board, but I'll mention in particular the chair, Andy Pringle. And I think even Andy would agree that while he's the chair and while the board obviously has been appointed to administer the affairs of the Police Services Board and to be the board, the person who keeps the place running over there and has for many, many years is Joanne Campbell, and the Executive Director title there is meant to convey that. Joanne Campbell has served as the Executive Director of the Toronto Police Services Board for 25 years and has been a part of the board's affairs for 30 years plus. Long before I held public office, I can't remember exactly why, but I was invited to an Ontario conference of police services boards. All the police services boards from the province gather from time to talk about governance and oversight issues and to generally get themselves educated about their role. And when I went there, and this was a number of years ago, I could tell from the fact that the very minute I walked in the room that the person that virtually everybody looked to in the room was Joanne Campbell. And we all know that that is not because she's from Toronto, because I've certainly learned in this job that the only thing you are is a great unifying factor from people from across the province or the country and their general dislike and disregard for Toronto. So in her case, it wasn't because she was from Toronto, it's because it became evident to me once I went over there of her wisdom and her experience and her good judgment. So she really succeeded in her career despite the fact she was one of ours being here from Toronto. And I've now had the pleasure, and there are a number of others in this chamber today, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Hart, others who've served on the police board over time. And those of us who've had that opportunity have also had the opportunity to see the great work that she has done. They can bear witness to what I've talked about. And they can bear witness, I think, as well to the fact that she's widely respected by her peers and has been respected in such manner by the board members with whom she has worked. They know her to be extraordinarily professional and highly principled. You know, I've come to see that she operates in that highly classic professional public service way that I've come to know much better here in the last 4 years. She will often, not always, but she will often wait to be asked about something. And inevitably she is asked, you know, what she thinks during a debate on what are often very complicated issues. But when she is asked, even though she sometimes has to be asked, she gives you unvarnished advice backed up by decades of experience. Joanne has led a team over that time that provides administrative support, and it's actually quite a small team, but they have a big job to do. I mean, the job of oversight of the police is a very important job and a complicated job in many respects. But she has led that team that has provided administrative support, research, communications, and policy development for the 7-member board, including the chair, and of course oversees the board's budget. I would just say to you that you know, that it is, of course, the oversight responsibility, which is the principal purpose of the board, that is far more fundamentally important than the administrative responsibilities. And Joanne has developed over time and has shared with board members, but also with other people around the province, an incredible knowledge and a deep understanding of the issues of police governance and oversight. And I think those who are here today who have served on that board understand those issues are very complex. And they involve intersections between things like policing and human rights, or between law enforcement and community building. And there are intersections that come about in terms of how best one can sort of do all of those things at the same time, and she has been a very wise advisor to board members on that. And so if you want to have an example of just how long her tenure has been and how much experience she's developed during that time, Joanne, has served the Toronto Police Services Board during the tenure of 8 different board chairs and 6 different chiefs of police. And that isn't because our city, as you know, has changed them any more often than would happen in the regular occurrence of people coming and going with retirements and so on, but that is how long she has served us. And so I just want to say, Joanne, thank you on behalf of the members of Toronto City Council, but also on behalf of the people of the City of Toronto, many of whom would not know of your work because that's true of many of the outstanding public servants. They're not people who are as well known to the public as we are, for better or for worse. But I want to say thank you for the fact that you've served the city and all of its residents so well, and we extend to you every good wish for a very long and happy and healthy retirement. And I know in your case retirement won't mean sitting around doing nothing. I don't know what you are going to be doing, but it'll be something, and it'll be something interesting and something I'm sure that will contribute. And I would ask if you would be kind enough to come up here now and to receive what we give, which is, you know, it's not a new car, it's not even a gold watch, but it is something that is meant to convey in a meaningful way our gratitude on a very official basis from the City Council and from myself as Mayor for your very extensive contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Tory. I'm reminded on this day of all of those members of council over the years who have actually served as chair of the Police Services Board. And I think of people like June Rowlands and Maureen Prinsloo, for a short time Pam McConnell, for a short time Gloria Lindsay-Luby. I think of Norm Gardner. And I think of the important relationship between council and the Police Services Board. And the many members, some of whom, as the Mayor mentioned, are here today, council members who have served terms on the board too. It's that relationship between the Police Services Board and council which contributes to robust police governance. And that relationship, I hope, will continue and blossom because we have a shared responsibility to continue to provide a police service which is excellent and inclusive and diverse and trusted. So I will watch fondly from a relatively close distance that relationship continuing and blossoming. I thank you for your support over the years, and I thank you for this honor today.
Thank you. Members of council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 54 items left on the agenda plus 43 member motions. Our first item of business today is the mayor's second key matter from item CC 43.2 on the appointment of a city manager. Council has decided to consider item EX 35.1 on the creation of a standing committee on housing and item EX 35.26 on the operating variance for the year ended December 31st, 2017 as the next two items of business today. Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. if the mayor's key matter is completed. I will now take the release of holds. Please put your name under request to question staff. Councillor Holyday.
Madam Speaker, I wonder if it's now also appropriate to suggest timing an item.
Sure.
Is
it okay, Councillor Holyday?
Thank you.
Which item is it first?
Yes, it would be EX
on blue page.
On blue pages. It's the hydro item.
EX 35.14 on page 3.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. On page 3, EX 35.14, Toronto Hydro Corporation, AGM. I'd just like to time that to be the first item after member holds, which I expect will be sometime later today, given that we have a full queue. But my rationale for this, very simply, is that we have to bring a number of people over from Toronto Hydro, and I'd like to make sure that their time is used efficiently.
So it would have to follow, because we do have two other items following the mayor's key items, so it would have to follow those items.
Understood.
Pardon? Yeah, member motions, you mean, yes.
First item after member motions. My
Yeah.
apologies if I misspoke.
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Holliday. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. I have 3 that I can release. On page 4, EX 35.25, the capital variance report for the year ended December 31st, 2017.
Okay, so on
Capital variance.
page 4, EX 3525 capital variance report, Councillor Perks is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor Mammoliti, please.
Councillor Layton, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 34 in favor.
Thank you.
Next speaker, if I may, EX 35.42, the Create TO Procedures Bylaw. I can release that.
On page 4, EX 35.42, Councillor Perks is releasing. Recorded vote.
I got it, your deputation.
Councillor Palacio, please. Councillor Mihevc,
Work
please.
that we can't do today.
Councillor Wong Tam, please. Deputy Mayor, thank you.
The item is adopted unanimously, 34 in favor.
And finally, Speaker, on the same page, EX 35.43, the Toronto Investment Board Procedures Bylaw.
Okay, on page 4, EX 35.43, Councillor Perks is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor Palacio, please.
Councillor Wong Tam, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 34 in favor.
Councillor De Beermaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On page 5 of the blue sheets, I could have a quick release. Under Licensing and Standards Committee, LS 26.5, installation of mural at Wali Al Asra, East Campus Muslim School through the Street Art Toronto Partnership Program. I was able to meet with staff this morning. My concerns were there wasn't sufficient funding allocated to make sure that the racist graffiti was replaced with a message of love in our community. And the staff have assured me that there is sufficient funding to do the mural properly, and so I'm very happy to release the item.
Okay, on page 5, LS 26.
Recorded vote, please.
26.5, Councillor De Beermaker is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor McMahon, please, and thank you. Councillor Pasternak. And Councillor Davis, please.
Councillor Mihevc, please.
Deputy Mayor, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 34 in favor.
Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a timing item, just building on Councillor Holliday. Currently, on page 3, item EX 35.1, creation of a standing committee on housing, is timed as the second item today. Councillor Bailao asked for that to be timed. I've spoken with the councillor, and there's a few items that are still being worked on. So there's a request to time this as the second item after member motions. So this would be following the hydro item that Deputy or Councillor Holliday moved.
Yeah, we'll probably go into tomorrow.
It may go into tomorrow, but the second item after member motions.
Okay, motion by Councillor Cressy. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have to move to reopen an item. It was adopted yesterday, the order paper, CC 43.16. There's a material change that staff have brought to our attention. Do I need to move this motion onto the screen? Yes, I do. Okay.
Can you tell us what the item is, please?
Yes. I don't recall the actual title, but it's a Yonge Street development, and that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 27 Council Procedures, City Council reconsider item CC 43.16. I think the address is 363 Yonge Street.
Okay, so there's a motion to reopen.
Sorry, the address is 363 to 391 Yonge Street and 3 Gerrard Street East, official plan amendment and zoning amendment application. Thank you.
All in favor? Reopening? Carried, and you'll hold it? Yeah, okay, thank you. All those in favor of adopting the order paper? Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please.
Councillor Mihevc and Councillor Crawford, please.
The motion to adopt the order paper carries unanimously, 35 in favor.
Okay, we will now go into the mayor's key item, second key item, which is CC 43.2, which is the appointment of the city manager. Motion to, who's got the motion to go on camera? Because they need to go on camera. Councillor de Beermaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to move that Council recess its public session to meet as Committee of the Whole in closed session to consider CC 43.2, appointment of a city manager, reason for confidential information, personal information about an identifiable individual.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. So we'll give about 5 minutes to vacate the council chambers. Okay, members of council, can please take your seats. City Council has completed its closed meeting consideration of item CC 43.2, appointment of the city manager. No motions were made in the closed session. We will now proceed to the public debate on this matter. Do we have any public questions? Okay, we'll go to speakers. Mayor Tory.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you. And may I begin by thanking the people both from the City Council, from the Public Service, and our outside advisors from Odgers for their help in what has been a very thorough process that has been undertaken here to arrive at this day. And I move the recommendations contained in the report and the material in the confidential attachment, which isn't going to be confidential for much longer, and I gather it already isn't. Somehow, in the great scheme of how these things always unfold, whether it's at the Hamilton end or the Toronto end, the name of the person that is being recommended is already now public on Twitter, as is the way of the world these days. But the recommendation is that we appoint Chris Murray, presently the city manager in the city of Hamilton, as the new city manager for the city of Toronto. And may I just say that there was an extensive process that was undertaken here involving a panel of 4 councillors, plus our professional public service advisors led by Mr. Pond, and our professional advisors from Odgers. I went through in some detail, much more than I could publicly, a very elaborate and extensive process that took place interviewing many people, both internal and external candidates for the job. And we ended up with a very enthusiastic recommendation of Mr. Murray. He's been the city manager there since 2009, and I think there's 2 things to be said about that. One is that he has worked there throughout that period, and if you look at the public reviews and you look at the reference checking we did about him, he has not only survived there since 2009, which is no easy feat in these kinds of very demanding jobs, but he continues to earn very positive reviews from people he has worked with throughout that period. And the second thing of note, of course, is that that job has been a job that is in the municipal sphere, so that his understanding of municipal issues, municipal governance, the relationship with other governments, the very particular requirements of city service delivery, I think is something that is very acute. We also wanted someone who is passionate about our priorities here, and certainly from our extensive discussions with him. And I think, the bottom line is that the priorities of cities these days in Ontario, Canada, and in many cases cities around the world are not that dissimilar in the context of transportation and mobility, housing, inequities that exist and inequality between different groups in the city, problems of making sure you maintain harmony vis-a-vis both public safety and also the kind of diversity that we want to continue to see flourish here. These are all things that he understands, that he has been dealing with, that he's very enthused about dealing with within the context of Toronto. And I guess I'll say the last thing I'll say in trying to summarize what's a lot of information we learned about him in the course of the interview process is that he's very committed to having government work in a way that I hope is better in this sense. He gets that one of the other challenges for all government, but in particular we speak here to our own affairs at the City of Toronto, is to have the departments work better together, the agencies work better together, to have kind of a collaborative team effort to get more things done, as opposed to what we've often seen, which is this kind of dispersed, silo-dominated thing that just bogs down decision-making and causes us to not accomplish all the things that people expect of us. I wanted to just say that a word of thanks, and there'll be much more occasion to do this because I think the actual transition would have him, if you approve of his appointment, take the position in August. But I just want to say at this juncture a word of thanks to Juliana Carbone. She, of course, has fulfilled every bit of confidence that we had in her asking her to take on the interim city manager's job. Will continue to do so, and I've had conversations with her already, and she will be an indispensable, valuable, trusted, confidant and partner, together with the other members of the City Public Service, in helping Mr. Murray to transition into this job. But I want her to understand on my behalf and on behalf of the councillors I will say that one of the other things that attracted us very much to Mr. Murray, and working in conjunction with Juliana and with others, is that he understands the spirit of partnership very well. And if you read about him and what's been written publicly about him, it's very much a spirit of partnership with the council, with the public service, with the public, with stakeholders. And this is something that he just exudes, and I think you'll see this when you get to know him. And just one final note, and that is that I think he was going in to tell the Mayor of Hamilton about this morning, so you can't be in two places at one time. And of course, he wouldn't presume upon the decision of the council. So in that sense, he will come here tomorrow, and we will make sure that he has a chance to shake your hand and say hello. And of course, there'll be lots of chance after that to get to know him. But he will be here tomorrow to just be in the building and have a chance for you to say hello to him. So those are my remarks, with thanks as well to all the panel members from City Council and to our professional public service advisor, Mr. Pond, and his team, and also to our outside professional advisors. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon to speak.
Thank you very much. And as you know, I was on the panel, so I just wanted to explain to you how difficult a decision this was, how much work it was. We had some incredible candidates, and we spent a lot of time with them, and I'm very thankful to our team, city staff, and who helped make it a little easier for us. But I think you will be pleased with our new city manager. He's a big picture guy, but he also gets in the trenches, and he's great with frontline workers. He's very interesting, innovative, and creative. As you will find out, he's calm and zen, but he can be tough. And of course, he needs to be tough to deal with us at times. And one question we asked about, kind of his public persona, and he had some line about, well, I'm not running, so I'm not running for election, so I don't need to be out there, which I liked. And Councillor Pasternak, you asked about moving. I asked about whether he would move to Toronto, because that's important to me as well. And he did mention that he would do that. He would not sell his home, but he would look at moving here. So I like that. And he's excited to come, and he loves Toronto. We needed to put it on tape, the amount of times he said how much he loved Toronto. So I'm excited. He's excited. I hope you're excited as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Here, are there any further speakers? Okay. On the item, recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please.
The item is adopted unanimously, 38 in favor.
Thank you. Our next item is on page 3, EX 35.1, creation of a standing committee on housing. Oh, it got moved? Okay, I'm just going by what was given to me this morning. Oh, so which one are we doing? Our next item then is on page 4, EX 35.26, which is the operating variance report. for the year ended December 31st, 2017. And Councillor Perks held the item down. So do we have questions to staff? Councillor Perks.
Yes, thank you. I guess to the CFO, while I understand it wasn't based on a report that you wrote, there was a motion at the Executive Committee which allocated or recommended to Council that we allocate, I believe it was $13 million to accelerating the Vision Zero program. So I just wanted to get your confirmation that it's within Council's authority, you know, irrespective of a pre-existing Council policy on surplus allocation, that Council can decide to make these allocations with surplus monies.
Through the Speaker, the current surplus management policy provides for 75% of the surplus to be allocated to the capital financing reserve and the balance to be allocated to underfunded reserves at the discretion of the CFO. The proposed motion that came out of Executive Committee would see $13 million directed to Vision Zero, funded through the Capital Financing Reserve Fund. So yes, that is perfectly within the authority of Council.
And what is the final surplus?
The final surplus is $297 million.
$297 million. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. I'll begin just with to the General Manager of Transportation Services. The $13 million that was moved at Executive to go towards Vision Zero initiatives, do we have a breakdown of what those Vision Zero initiatives would be for $13 million?
Through the Speaker, the initiatives that we've identified initially are acceleration or increasing of the quantities of existing Vision Zero programs, mobile watcher speed signs, speed humps, additional work on community and school safety zones, bike corridor enhancements, things of that nature.
And is there a full detailed list of every single one of those initiatives that exists somewhere that I can look at? Not this second.
We're in the process of developing that quite specifically because this, as you'll remember, would be an additional acceleration of the Vision Zero program, and so we've had 2 already this year, and so we're in the process of putting that specific list together if should this pass, okay, for how those monies would be spent.
So the detailed breakdown you're in the process of developing. So if councillors have specific initiatives that may fall into that $13 million, should we suggest those to you directly?
The Vision Zero program, as you know, is data-driven. We select locations and identify program areas based on the data in terms of what we believe will help solve the issues of on-street pedestrian and cycling fatalities. And so many of the locations of programs that are going to be implemented a little later in the year, we are still working, Vision Zero staff is still working on identifying some of those locations. For some of those things, that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then to our CFO, so I heard in your response to Councillor Perks, so am I correct, we had a surplus ending in 2017 of $270 million?
297 million.
297, excuse me. And so this is to use 13 million of that for Vision Zero. What does 297 minus 13, 87, 80, what does the outstanding 284 million, what will that be going towards?
So, as I mentioned to Councillor Perks, 297 is allocated 75%. A portion of that is allocated to the city building, the city planning and reserve funds.
Yep.
And then the balance, which is approximately 260 million, 75% of that is allocated to the capital financing reserve, and the balance is allocated to various underfunded reserve funds at the discretion of the CFO. So what we're looking to do here is allocate 13 million out of the capital financing reserve fund.
And remind me, the capital financing reserve fund totals how much?
So
how much contribution are we putting into that?
We're putting in 190 million into the capital financing reserve fund. And so your question is 13 million out of the 190 million will be allocated to the initiative that was recommended by Executive Committee.
So there is still 177 million in the capital financing reserve fund this year?
At least, yes.
At least 177 million. Thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to build on Councillor Cressy's first question about what does this $13 million buy the citizens of Toronto, and I guess through you to the General Manager of Transportation. There was a quick list of a number of things, the watch your speed signs, which I think everyone's excited about, some improvements to school safety zones, which I think is a lot of things like signage and line painting and a lot of work that goes into that. But you caught my attention with a couple. One of them was bike something, and it wasn't bike lanes, but it was some sort of a bicycle infrastructure.
Through you, Madam Speaker, it was examining existing bike corridors and looking at enhancements for cycling corridors to improve safety.
Enhancements to improve safety, okay. And then speed humps, I think you
Correct.
mentioned as well. So I guess my question is, we're going to provide money, additional money to the Transportation Services Department, but are we giving you any additional authority? And to be further to that, my understanding is certain changes to bike corridors would require council approval, especially if it changes parking provisions or signage, that type of thing, the reduction of any lanes, and speed humps also have a process that has to be followed as well. So can you tell us the types of things that you might be able to prioritize on that list without council approval, because the window is closing fast prior to the next election?
Through you, all of the items that are on this list, especially the cycling corridors, are all existing cycling corridors that would need upgrades for striping and marking and further separation. The speed humps, we have a backlog of speed humps to implement. They've all been approved through the community council process, and so it would be clearing out that backlog this year.
Okay, and I really, to put it on the finest point, is some of the decisions are controversial, to say the least. Are we giving you any additional authorities through this process to enter into something that we haven't dealt with as a council?
Through you, no.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mammoliti.
So this particular fund has $13 million in it. Is it broken down per community council, per ward? Or is it the determination of staff as to how to allocate that money? I don't know who will answer that.
Through you, no, it is not allocated by area. Vision Zero looks at the data that we have to prioritize locations based on safety information, so it's citywide implementation.
Right, but it talks about, Vision Zero talks about all the schools as well. And so wouldn't it make sense for us as councillors to say that we either break it down per ward to get to the priorities, or community councils, so that $13 million gets divvied up into community council, as opposed to perhaps most of the money being spent in the downtown part of the city?
So we did a secondary prioritization of our school safety zones for implementation this year, where we ranked them top to tail for the whole city, and then we also went back and ranked them ward by ward, and we're actually implementing them on a ward by ward basis. So we are going through and looking at that prioritization citywide.
But if we have now determined that every school is a priority, right, through this, then every school becomes a priority, right?
Through you, there are still schools that are in locations that have known safety concerns and issues that can be addressed through the countermeasures that we're proposing that we would prioritize to move forward first, which is why we went through and did that.
But who prioritizes them?
The Vision Zero technical staff looks at the data that we have on crashes, on the density of school children in the area who can possibly walk or cycle to school.
Okay, so let me give you a scenario. When some of my communities ask for changes to the road in front of the school, I'm being told we don't have the money to be able to do it. So now that we've got $13 million there, perhaps we've got a little bit of money to do that. So wouldn't it make sense for community councils to determine where that money goes?
Through you, the $13 million, if adopted, is proposed to be spent this year, and so the community safety zones and the school safety zones that we brought through PWIC, I believe it was last month, identified enhancements to happen to all schools, as you mentioned,
so that's
citywide.
what I'm saying, is that all those schools, if you divvy them up, we all have them in our community councils. So why not divvy up the money so that we can try and address some of those issues in front of our schools?
We've already gone through and prioritized every school in every ward, and we've started making the rounds to individual councillors to look at those schools and adjust the priorities based on observation. So we can certainly come back and have that conversation with everyone, but we've used the data to prioritize.
But we only have one more meeting left for community councils. So wouldn't it make sense for us to have that conversation at the last community council meeting for each ward so that we all can determine where our priorities are in our communities as the councillors and not have to rely on a technical report that may or may not surface in 6 months.
And that's the reason why we've gone back to individual councillors to look at the list that was generated from the technical report.
With all due respect, I didn't get anybody calling me on this, and I'm not sure how many others have. So I'm going to try and move a motion that best represents each ward for the $13 million. I would think the best motion I could pass is for community councils to have this conversation in July. Would that be okay with staff?
We went out and did a couple of briefings on Vision Zero to council overall, and then we followed up with all the councillors who had asked to see their list. We're happy to continue to have those individual meetings.
Okay, so the only councillors that you've talked to are the ones that have asked you to date, then?
We did an overview on how we were prioritizing the schools in each ward with council. We had, I think, 2 or maybe 3 sessions, and then a number of councillors approached us to follow up to look at the schools that were ranked in their ward. And we're happy to continue to have those conversations before we implement.
Would staff have any objections to me moving a motion for community councils to have this dialogue in July?
Through you, my only hesitation is on the timing of when the community council agendas close. I think it's next week.
No, council is next. Community councils are next Wednesday.
Yeah, they're next Wednesday. So that would be my only question is whether the agendas are open and we could still.
But that doesn't stop us as community council to recommend the work that needs to be done in front of our schools.
I think community council can take that action.
That was your last question. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question to the CFO. Our surplus, you mentioned, was $297 million. I think it's around 2%, a little over 2% of our operating. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, yes. We have, as you know, an operating budget of $11 billion plus a rate-supported budget of $2 billion, so a total budget of $13 billion. The operating surplus at 297 represents roughly 2%.
Okay. Now, is that typical when you're looking at surpluses? $297 million over the last 3 or 4 years seems to be quite a healthy surplus, I'm assuming, compared to other years?
Certainly, through the Speaker. In the last 5 years, the surplus has ranged from about $200 million to over $300 million. So it's not an unusual thing to see happen.
Okay, so and just there's 2 main factors that bring this surplus to us. We have the MLTT, of course, has been again did really well last year, and I believe that was 95 or somewhere above projections. Is that correct? And the other component, I think, in the surplus was the TTC, which was I believe $88 million over.
Through the Speaker, that's correct. The MLTT. Overperformed by $96 million, and the Transit Authority, the TTC's operating budget, we saw a favorable variance of $89 million.
But again, and just with those, then there are other items that brought it up to 297. Just those 2 are not necessarily typical, and you would not want to rely on those every year when we're looking at allocating the surpluses, of course.
Yes, of course.
So even though the 297 sounds great, you know, we have to be really careful that take those 2 items out. We are pretty much very slim when we're looking at surpluses.
In fact, if one takes those 2 items out, we're left with a favorable variance of only $77 million, which is roughly 0.6% of the overall budget.
Now, our policy, of course, is to put all the surpluses back into the reserves. Why do we do that?
Well,
what's the importance of that?
The surplus is really one-time funds, and so one would want to allocate that revenue to capital funding. And so we allocate it to the capital financing reserve as well as other tax stabilization reserve funds.
Okay. And when we're replenishing those reserves, the one reserve that we use, or you hear a lot in the budget process, is a tax stabilization reserve. Now, we did deplete that, as I recall, through the process for a number of the different priorities that Council wanted. If not mistaken, Vision Zero may be one of them that we increased. Have we, through this process, replenished the tax stabilization reserve to where you feel it is comfortable?
Yes. In fact, Councillor's guideline is that the tax stabilization reserve fund be roughly at 1% of the tax levy. Our tax levy is about $4 billion, so 1% of that is $40 million. And what we've done here is attempted to replenish that reserve fund to reach that target.
Okay, and so you did mention that 25% that is be going, $190 million going into the capital finance reserve. What are the other priorities in the capital finance reserve? My assumption is we may see some motions today to take away from that. Can you tell me what do we use that reserve for and how important it is?
Certainly, it's exceedingly important because it mitigates the impact of debt financing on the city. So we utilize that reserve fund to fund transit projects, waterfront revitalization initiatives, Union Station, for example. There's a number of key strategic projects that are contained in the 10-year capital program that are funded through the Capital Financing Reserve Fund.
And recognizing that, yes, in executive, we did look at the putting $13 million into the Vision Zero reserve for the priorities, and there are other priorities in the city. You would not recommend in any way increasing that amount, because really what it's doing is taking away from other priorities that we also have to address. So you would not recommend or support any other motions that we may see today to deplete that reserve any further?
Through the Speaker, this is a council decision, and I really feel that it's really within council's purview to make that decision.
Thank you.
There are competing priorities, and council has to weigh in on which of those priorities it should be funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm going to have some questions for the General Manager of Transportation as it relates to the recommendation that's in front of us to increase funding for Vision Zero projects. Are red light cameras part of Vision Zero, the Vision Zero work?
Yes, they are. They're part of the program.
So how many red light cameras do we have?
We have 149 in operation today.
We have 149, and signals, we have a total signalized intersections?
Well over 2,500.
2,357, sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Do red light cameras work?
Yeah, they've been proven very effective at addressing right-angle collisions and red light running. And so I don't have the number in front of me about how effective they are, but they're considerably effective, which is why we were happy to double the program.
So we got numbers from your staff, and maybe you can just tell me if these sound way off, that the reductions in serious injuries go down by 23% and reductions in fatalities by 40%.
I believe that, yep.
That's a fairly significant drop, correct?
It's very significant, and as you can imagine, red light running also comes with speed, and so people who typically get hit in an intersection from a red light runner are typically seriously injured or killed.
And red light camera locations are chosen based on?
The intersections where we're seeing a significant number of red light runners and where we see a significant number of right-angle collisions.
And is the amount of money put towards installation of these limited? Do you currently have a limit to it? What's holding us back from putting more than 149 cameras in?
We put in for the first 74, I believe, in 2016. It's not just transportation services. There's a courts portion of that. There's also the provincial offences officers who have to confirm and then send out the citations. So it is actually a program piece that's larger than just transportation, which is why if we were to expand it, we would want to bring forward a proposal through the 2019 budget process to do so.
So we have a technology that works, that helps reduce serious injuries and fatalities. We just haven't rolled it out far enough yet. To do that, you would like to bring back a report suggesting how that might happen?
We're happy to do that, yep.
Just a question on the revenue. Red light cameras, are they revenue neutral?
Here, I have that information.
Not to the Transportation Department's budget, but overall to the city.
Hold on. Yes. They are.
They are. And so in 2017, the report was about 2.1 million they cost for the program elements, the infrastructure, and the operations, but we received that back in the fines.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Davis. Councillor Davis is not here. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. We have roughly how many schools in the City of Toronto, public and a separate school board?
754 that are Toronto District School Board and Toronto Catholic District School Board from K through the elementary school level. There's also about another 25 that are the French public schools. And then there are additional private schools beyond that.
We're looking at about 800 and change. How much money would you be allocating per school in order to bring up to speed the changes that we want to make?
We haven't. For all of the schools. Yeah. So about $35,000 per school for upgrading the frontage area with the signs, the pavement markings, some beacon.
And that adds up to 24 million or and change. Would I be correct in that, or maybe?
Roughly 32 million.
And how much money are we allocating this year?
Are we allocating to the schools this year?
We basically just recently accelerated from 40 to now 80 schools.
So we've accelerated, as you know, from 40 to 80 schools.
2.4 million, I believe it is.
About 2.4 million.
Okay.
For the first phase of that. Doesn't include signals, and it's just based on the initial review.
I appreciate the fact that we're under an economic crunch. But what would we say to a parent if an accident were to happen in the school that we're not prioritizing this year? What we will say to those parents?
We are doing all the things that we can right now within the existing framework we have to work with schools to increase school safety, to identify the locations where there are real significant safety issues. We've gone through and prioritized and identified for implementation beyond any acceleration this year, all of the schools where we've seen safety challenges, and we're moving into to deal with those first in 2018. We've increased our sign production, we've increased our staffing so that we can get more of those improvements out on the street as fast as we can.
I'm going to go specific to two schools in my ward. We had a fatality on February 26th or 27th. A young man died. Since then, the community has moved on. We have got petitions. It came to Community Council. It was passed unanimously that we do have speed humps and calming measure devices in the School of Kennedy and David Lewis. Is that on your list for this year?
It absolutely is, and in fact, I was able to verify yesterday that it will be done before the school season starts in the fall.
So I'm expecting then to report to my constituents that the speed humps will be going on. We will be placed in David Lewis and Kennedy Public School in the designated zones that was agreed upon by Community Council before the start of the new year, new school year.
That is what I learned yesterday from my staff.
And I thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions are to the GM of Transportation. So if I understand it correctly, the additional $13 million, it will be spent on existing initiatives as part of the Vision Zero plan?
Through you, that's correct.
And we are not considering any additional initiatives at this point?
We've done. We have a pretty extensive list of initiatives under Vision Zero. We have 50 countermeasures that have been identified through the plan, and so we are continuing to roll those out, especially with a focus on schools, senior safety zones, and high-speed locations.
Okay, so let me ask you a question with respect to the countermeasures. In London, England, you know, everybody, let's face it, no matter what laws we bring in, people are going to be walking with their phones and they're always distracted. There's something distracting any pedestrian walking the streets. But in London, they have interesting kind of markings and messages when you look down. So as you approach an intersection, the sidewalk color will change, right? Like you get into a red zone if you get to a curb, there'll be messages that say, look right, look left. Are we looking at any of those countermeasures to actually deal with the realities of how people are moving around the city, and primarily with the fact that their heads are down?
Through you, so we are certainly looking at a more broad use of pavement legends, certainly speed legends on the pavement to start in school zones. We are very open and continue to look at other Vision Zero cities who have used successful tools such as the ones that you mentioned. As well, we know that there is some line work that you can do that will provide a visual narrowing at intersections and give drivers a heads up that there's some conflicts ahead. So we're open to looking at all of those items, yes.
So do you need a motion to look into those additional countermeasures or pavement legends? And if you don't, can we see that happening within this $13 million? Like, I have a funny sense that it's going to be a lot more than $13 million by the time this item's over today. But in that, can we see some of that be implemented? I mean, it seems to be working in other cities, and we have none of that here.
My only hesitation is to understand what can be done. It's capital dollars that are being discussed right now, and so for new installations, we may be able to move those forward as part of our capital program. That would be my question that I'll advise you when I get more information on that. But we're certainly happy to look at that either as a pilot or in some specific locations.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hart.
The GM, I'm all in favor of the extra $13 million, but from what I'm seeing in my own ward, I'm just wondering, do your staff have the capacity to deliver on the $13 million?
Through you, thank you for the question. We have a very, very hardworking staff complement on Vision Zero. We are looking within the existing complement to prioritize and ensure that we are being as efficient and as effective as we can. We're utilizing consultant services and contract services where we can. Further expansions will be somewhat limited by our ability to have oversight of consultants and also the appropriate staff to do the work.
But you feel the $13 million is within your ability to deliver?
It's going to be a bit of a stretch, but as I mentioned, we're looking deep within the organization to prioritize Vision Zero, which may mean that some other things slow down a little bit.
Thank you.
Councillor Nunziata to question.
Yes. Thank you. So the report that went through PWIC, I think it was a month ago, some of the recommendations on, maybe it was 2 months ago, Vision Zero. Is the 13 million part of that?
Through you, it is not.
Okay, so that was for 2019.
The report that went through, I believe it was in February, was a 6.3 million acceleration over 3 years of the existing budget of Vision Zero.
Okay, so
that went through Budget Committee, Councillor. This would be in addition to that.
This would be addition.
Correct.
So the report that I brought forward at PWIC a few months ago on the community safety that I presented to you, and you were part of that. That's not part of the 13 million.
Through you,
that would be for.
There might be locations that are certainly a number of the locations that were reflected in that report for bicycle safety and for pedestrian safety are likely on our list of locations to implement changes to. So acceleration of programs through this $13 million will likely have an impact.
So some of it could be implemented. Okay. Now, as far as I know, somebody asked questions about the red light cameras. So. 13 million would be part of installing some of these red light cameras?
No, the red light cameras would be an expansion of the red light camera program. We are fully supportive of, but we need to bring that through the budget process for 2019 because it is actually a significant program to increase in terms of implications for court services and revenue.
So there's partnerships there. So
yeah, there are partnerships.
So even if you had the money now, you couldn't implement locations for the red light cameras. Is that correct?
Not additional expansion.
Like for this year. Let's say if we gave you more money, we couldn't put them in?
For red light cameras, it would have to be for 19 and beyond.
Okay. Now, who determines the locations of the red light cameras?
The red light camera is, we do an analysis and we look at high-speed intersections where we've seen red light running, a significant instance of red light running, and right-angle collisions. Is that the only two? Yep.
So would the request as well be from the community and local councillor?
Certainly, we would come back with that information to verify and get further feedback like we've done on all of our programs, but it is a data-driven analysis that we use. Those things, speed, intersection, red light running, high instances of that. We work in partnership with the police to identify these locations, as well as places where we see right-angle collisions.
So if we were to give you more than $13 million today, what would you do with that? Would you be able to implement with anything,
as Councillor
anything this year?
As Councillor Hart mentioned, there are limitations on what the staff can actually deliver. And so certainly we have, as part of our Vision Zero acceleration this year, we've looked at how to restructure and use our existing staff to get the most benefit for Vision Zero. We're making a number of modifications to our shops, to our crews, so that we can get things out there faster in terms of our contracts. But at some point, we need additional staff in order to be able to expand a program.
Yeah, so you wouldn't be able to get it completed by the end of the year.
13 million is going to be a stretch for us. That's 32 million in total for 2018 on Vision Zero.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Nunziata. Councillor Campbell, questions of staff.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's for the Director of Transportation Services. Do we know, so we recently had a planning report called TO Core. There was a mobility report in it through planning and growth, and it pointed out the number of pedestrians that are being killed and injured downtown. Do we know, as a transportation department, we must have statistics on where these incidents are occurring and where the big problems lay?
We do.
And so why the emphasis on school zones?
Through the emphasis on school zones, it's one of the 6 emphasis areas in the Vision Zero plan that we started with. We focus on vulnerable road users, and school children, especially those in the elementary grades, have been demonstrated to be more vulnerable to the ability to navigate the roads. There's a lot of activity that happens around schools in terms of pick-up and drop-off. They tend to be in locations, local streets, etc.
So I get that, but you know, don't take this the wrong way, but this almost sounds like window dressing to me, because of course children are vulnerable. The parents want to drive them to school rather than walk or put them on the bus, and those areas are all very congested. But I think we should be targeting where the problems are happening. And is it not a fact that the problems are happening mid-block and on corners and in downtown and congested areas? And are we really addressing the problem here?
So through you, there's 50 countermeasures in Vision Zero. School safety zones is one of 6 emphasis areas. We talked about red light cameras, which have a huge effect on intersection crashes. We're certainly focusing on seniors, which, as we know from the numbers, is a significant number of the people who are getting killed and seriously injured, in terms of giving them additional crossing time. It signals further markings, alerting drivers to where we know seniors are going to be, and then certainly conversations around the long blocks, especially on some of our suburban streets where speeds are high and there's destinations on both sides. So having conversations with the TTC about transit stops and the location of transit stops.
So I get all that, but I'm just wondering, I get it's one of the 6 emphasis areas, but why are we not specifically, why are we not specifically addressing areas that are most problematic? So where do we know where most of the deaths are occurring? Or is there an area where most of the deaths are occurring?
Through you, we have information on our website. We work with the police routinely. We know where every killed and serious injury has happened.
So we know.
There's some in every ward.
There's some in every ward. But where is the greatest concentration of deaths?
The transition areas towards the suburbs, my staff tells me.
Okay. So why are we not, the transition areas in the suburbs, so why is that not our first priority? Why school zones?
It is a priority. School zones have not necessarily had the tools that we have needed in place to address issues like speeding. We certainly have a lot of concern from the community. We're hearing when we go out to the communities to consult on Vision Zero, a lot of focus and emphasis on school zone safety.
Right.
We know that the school board and the school district, they've been great partners with us on that. So there's definitely an issue in school zones.
My personal view is that the schools don't do enough to get down with that. I can leave that for a topic later. But anyhow, do we know as a city why? Do we know, for example, when a car hits a pedestrian, do we know why that is occurring and who is at fault? Or a cyclist? Because sometimes, obviously, if a pedestrian, because I don't have the statistics, I don't believe the police keep the statistics. So how do we make a determination?
So the police. Oh, did you? I'm sorry. Did you?
Sorry. Well, I mean, how do we make a determination? I mean, I think at fault is part of getting to the core of the problem. And it's either distracted drivers, it could be distracted pedestrians, or it could be both.
The police do a very thorough investigation. They give that investigation to us. We go out typically after one of these incidents and we do a deep dive on the engineering to look at the site and understand if there were things that could be modified. And based on the police report, we have an assessment of the types of impacts, and there's certainly always an identification of what the circumstances were that led to that crash. Speed is often an issue. Driver distraction is often an issue. Oddly enough, it's not very typically that pedestrian distraction is cited as an issue of these crashes. Is that accurate?
Okay, so my last question. One thing that I'm a proponent of is public awareness and public education. Has there been any discussion in Transportation Service about a real public relations campaign for everybody to wake up and slow down and pay attention, where that would involve the spending of millions of dollars, frankly?
Through you, absolutely. We're going to start rolling out, focusing first on bicycle safety and then distracted driving in the fall. Education is another critical element of Vision Zero. We absolutely have ground to cover in terms of public education.
Thank you for the answers.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, questions?
Thank you very much, Speaker. Councillor Campbell has just stolen some of my thunder with respect to questions that I was going to ask, but I still want to focus on some of the issues around wide roadways in the suburban areas and so on. On Friday, I spent 2 hours with a family who lost a family member who was basically killed at Merrifield and Birchmount Road. There are no traffic signals there, but there is a large concentration of residential area and so on the east side of the roadway. Residents are trying to cross to the west side or from the west side to the east side going to catch the bus. I'm just wondering, and in my time here, I probably have dealt with probably about 7 or 8 of those types of situations where a member of my community have died in the suburban area. And I know that the focus had been what appears to me more largely the downtown. I'm wondering, as part of your Vision Zero visioning, looking at narrowing some of our roadways and so on, and looking at figuring out how we can create a more inviting environment for pedestrians and people to be able to travel in the community in a much safer manner.
So through you, Madam Speaker, that's absolutely critical to our success in Vision Zero. I've been here for about 18 months now, and some of the more challenging discussions that I think we will have moving forward is about road reconstruction and what those roads look like, especially in areas where we have multi-lane, wider, high-speed roadways. The division has recently adopted new lane width standards, and so narrowing those lanes is very helpful. Reducing the crossing distances, again, moving bus stops to intersections where people can more safely cross with the light. All of those are issues. We have very, very long blocks to compound the challenges in many of these areas. And then the other issue, without changing any of the roadway, is speed reduction, especially on the long blocks, wide streets, where we have sort of suburban scale development. Cars tend to travel at faster speeds. And so we are partnering with the Toronto Police Service to do more speed enforcement blitzes. I think you'll see that those will start to roll out citywide with an emphasis in locations where we're seeing speed as a factor resulting in killed and serious injury collisions.
And through you, Speaker, and I don't mean to be argumentative with respect to this aspect of my questioning, but when we talk to police, they have issues on policing in general, not enough resources, they say, to deal with some of the challenges that they're dealing with. So how do we really expect them to actually provide the policing service to combat some of the traffic issues that we're dealing with now? I'm just asking that. I'm just wondering if there's a way that you've discussed with them so you can highlight and enlighten us with respect to a better sense of understanding.
So there are two things. Roadway redesign is one tool that is critical and important to improving safety on high-speed wide roadways. And that's making the streets narrower, expanding the sidewalks, narrowing the lanes, creating more frequent crossings, narrowing those crossing distances. Those are the types of tools that have worked quite well in other cities. And as you'll see as we bring forward in any kind of capital projects that do a reconstruction, we are proposing those. We've had a number of them this year. And then on the police service enforcement, certainly the traffic unit could use sort of more capacity. One of the reasons we're very enthusiastic about community safety zones is because community safety zones come along with them the ability to implement automated speed enforcement should we finally get the ability to do that, where the fines double. And so that automation is going to be of huge benefit to the police and to us and to the community in helping to resolve some of these speed enforcement issues.
Now, as it relates to speed bumps or speed humps, in my community, many people don't want them.
Yep.
Some do. And so we have a bit of a conflict in the process that we'd have to go through. In terms of making communities safer, we hear about the fact that the ambulance services, the fire trucks, and other type of vehicles that are first responders are concerned about them. We've heard about the snow plows, for example, plowing the street, and those bumps or humps pose a danger or a safety issue for those vehicles and so on. I'm just wondering, what is your actual position and your views? Does the speed bumps and or speed humps provide a safe measure in community, or is it simply that it's nice to be there and there's a perception that it actually does? Does it or does it not?
Through you, speed humps do reduce speeds, and we use them in locations where we try to have them be least impactful on our emergency service providers. They do have a positive impact. They're not the only traffic calming tool in the toolkit, for sure. Right. And so many jurisdictions will look at on-street parking to further narrow the roadway. It's about keeping that roadway narrow so people feel comfortable driving at the right speed.
Just for the record, I'm aware that they reduce speed. My issue is that in terms of the gas, for example.
Counselor? Yeah.
Amount of time it would take to
Thanks.
speed up.
Oh, no, they're effective. I think.
Okay, thank you. Before we continue, I want to welcome the adult students from Corbrook Awakening Abilities, located in Ward 38. Their local counselor is Counselor Glenda Bearmaker, and their group leader is Matilda Clifford. Welcome. Counselor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just a couple of questions for staff. This plan, actually, Council endorsed it and was to start in 2017. Is that correct?
Through you, the Vision Zero plan, yes, was to begin in 2017.
But we decided to immediately, upon Council approving it, to accelerate it, and we started working in 2016.
Through you, yes.
So it was accelerated then.
That was the first acceleration.
Then, again, the following year, it was accelerated through the budget process.
Twice, I believe.
Twice. So that's, I think, if my math's correct, that's now 3 times. And today, we would be accelerating it yet again if this is approved by Council.
Correct.
So that would be 4 times. Also, at Public Works 2 or 3 weeks ago, when your report about the community safety zones was before us, PWIC, I moved the motion, but all of PWIC supported accelerating the community safety zones, basically the school safety zones. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. That was unanimous.
Unanimous. Okay. So that adds up to 6. And that's quite significant. I wanted to ask you about red light cameras. I know your predecessor, Steve Buckley, was a big fan of these and spoke to me regularly about what a great impact they had on safety. And can you tell me the number? I know we've recently, in the last couple of years, doubled them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you give me the numbers?
149 are totally are out on the street now. We started with 74 and we're at 149.
So we started with 74, we're at 149. Do we anticipate doing more?
Correct. We plan to bring a report through the Budget Committee for 2019 for further expansion of the program.
Okay. And very effective tactic.
Especially at intersections where we have red light runners, high speeds, and right angle collisions.
Okay. And automated speed enforcement, again, we've all had many conversations about this. We're pushing this aggressively. There's a pilot this year that we don't need provincial approval to roll out. But when we actually roll it out, hopefully in 2019, we do need provincial approval. And so there's some outstanding pieces of that bill that went through in May of 2017.
That's correct. The final regulations still need to be signed off.
Okay, so we're waiting for that. So we've got to push for that. But photo radar or automated enforcement is what you like to call it. That will be, hopefully, with the provincial approval, rolled out at a number of schools only, and community safety zones across the city in 2019.
Through you, the pilot is scheduled to go in before the start of school in 2018. Depending on the regulations, we would hope to be able to roll it out at the end of 2018 or early 2019, but we're really trying to get it in place as soon as we can.
And do you have a number that you can apply to that? I know the pilot you were talking about 4, but for the actual implementation, once it's approved, do you have a number allocated to red light cameras or automated enforcement?
We do not have
not red light cameras, photo radar or automated enforcement.
We don't have a number currently as to what the deployment would be. It's going to, in part, it's going to be about understanding what the capacity is to write the citations and get the cameras in place and the technology, which is why we're excited to pilot it this year, so we can have a lot of those questions answered as soon as possible, and we're ready to move forward as quickly as we can.
So currently, for the 2019 plan, you do not have a number identified?
The goal is to put them in all of the community safety zones.
In every single community safety zone, which would be 750?
No, 754, I believe.
750.
And probably an expansion of that because we have a few more schools to add. So upward about 800 locations.
So 800 because we added some at Public Works. We added the French schools, etc. Some private schools. And so those would be included.
So the number will be expanded. The rollout, again, will have to happen based on the capacity that we have to get all the pieces in place. There's signage related to it. There's cameras related to it. There's procurement, all those pieces.
Okay. Thank you very much for those answers.
Thank you.
Okay.
So is Councillor Davis around? No? Okay, then we'll close off part. Well, her name's there. There's no other questioners, so I'll have to skip over her name. Oh, Councillor DeGiorgio.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have one very quick question. Mr. Kelly.
Councillor Kelly?
My question is, with respect to the money that's being allocated out, do we have any indication? You mentioned about 800 locations that we're intending to spend money on. Do you have any indication of the distribution across the various community councils?
The 800 represents the schools where we would be rolling out community safety zones.
Understood, but what I'm saying is, do you have an idea of the allocation across the community councils of the schools?
But in terms of dollars, I don't. What I mentioned to Councillor Mammoliti is we went through and prioritized all of the schools per ward based on our criteria, and there's about however many schools there are per ward. We're working down the list. We're doing 2 to 3 this year, and we'll continue to move forward.
Can you share that information with us? Or?
Yes, absolutely. We're happy to share it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Davis, and then we'll go to Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I was in a meeting, and I hope that my questions don't repeat others, and I hope you'll indulge me in asking them. I wondered about the answer that Mr. Farag gave earlier, that we are going to fund the additional Vision Zero initiatives through taking it from the Capital Financing Reserve. but we're also putting into the capital financing reserve. So you're putting in and taking out and essentially using the surplus anyway. So does this mean that from now on, we can draw from the capital financing reserve for other items when we deal with the year-end surplus?
Through the Speaker, Council certainly has the authority to utilize all of the reserve funds,
Okay.
so long as they're not, so long as they're discretionary, and the Capital Financing Reserve Fund is a discretionary reserve fund.
Okay, so if we find that there are additional priorities that weren't addressed in the capital budget that given year, we can access this fund.
Through the Speaker, the Capital Financing Reserve Fund is used to fund the 10-year capital program. And so a portion of that reserve fund is already allocated
I understand
for a number
that.
of projects.
I'm talking about the 200 million that's getting added to it.
Yes, and that was, a portion of that was anticipated to fund future projects.
A portion of that is intended to, so you're already budgeting on a surplus going into the capital reserve fund?
The Council's policy has been to allocate a portion of future surpluses to the Capital Financing Reserve Fund.
You budget for a surplus to go into the capital fund.
We have a modest amount that's budgeted
Yes.
to the Capital Financing
Yes.
Reserve from future surpluses, yes.
You,
And that has
so
been
let me just understand this. For 2017, for 2018, how much was in the budget that you assumed from the 2017 surplus?
We've assumed for 2018, $50 million.
15 or 50?
50.
50. So we had a surplus of 200. One point it says 196 million, and then you said 297. So what is the actual surplus?
So the actual gross surplus is 297 million.
Okay.
We have to allocate a portion of that to legislative requirements.
No, I understand, 75%. So you are budgeting for, you are putting, not you, we approved a budget that assumes a certain amount of surplus, and you're saying it was 50 million this year. What is the 10-year capital plan assuming?
The 10-year capital plan assumes $50 million from the surplus to be allocated to future capital financing reserves.
50 million annually for 10 years?
That's correct, Councillor.
So $500 million of surplus is being budgeted.
Over a 10-year period, yes.
Why don't we just budget properly to have lower surplus and put the money into the capital budget?
So, Councillor, this is a long-term capital plan that relies on a number of things, including future surpluses. It includes things like future dividends from our agencies. So that is the council-adopted financing plan, and it supports the 10-year capital plan.
Yeah, we only, when did we start to budget for capital, our capital budget based on a certain amount of surplus?
This policy started all the way back to 2012.
In 2012. Okay. So what are the reserves that you're going to put the remainder into?
Through the chair, Councillor, Table 5 identifies all of the reserve funds that we are replenishing, the most significant of which is the Tax Rate Stabilization Reserve Fund.
Oh, the Tax Rate Stabilization Reserve Fund. You're putting another 40 million, 38 million.
Yes, and that's,
So that money is also money that can be accessed as a discretionary fund. Isn't that the case?
So Council has adopted a policy that we should maintain a 1% amount. 1% of the tax levy ought to be included in the tax rate stabilization account, and we're simply replenishing it.
Councillor Davis, that's your last question. That was your last question, sorry.
That policy was adopted many years ago.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, you took your name off? Oh, okay. Okay, that's it for the questions. We will now go to speakers. Councillor Perks, you held the item down to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have a motion. So rather than read the whole thing out, I'll quickly summarize it and then I'll move on to my remarks. It's three parts. The first part allocates $500,000 to assist the Transportation Department in getting consultant support so that when we resurface and reconstruct roads, the design automatically makes the streets safer than what was there before. So we're not replacing like with like, we're replacing what's there with something safer. And this is to get advice on how to do that in the tendering of our road reconstruction and resurfacing projects. The second speaks to a long-standing issue that's been here at Council in terms of road design. When we're designing our roads, and I know this was an issue with Eglinton Connects, we often have to match our lane widths to very large fire trucks. Municipalities around the world, including Hamilton, and perhaps we can get some help from our new city manager, have begun to look at purchasing smaller fire trucks so we can get smaller lanes and make the crossing distances shorter, make the intersections safer. This is to bring $500,000 in to do a global scan of what's available in that direction. The third takes a bit more explanation. I don't want to use up my whole speech, but you'll all be familiar with the intersection of DuPont, Dundas, Old Weston, and Annette, where the road goes under that underpass as you're coming along. It's one of those sites that the general manager talked about with the transition from suburban traffic into the urban area. There have been a number of fatalities in and around that over the years, and the community has been working with staff and with other agencies to try to find a way to design it safely. The preferred design costs more than what is allocated. This provides some money so that if the staff come to the design that is safer as their preferred option, there's adequate funding to do that. So those are three, and I'd be happy to answer any questions to describe them more. I want to begin my remarks by congratulating the Mayor and the members of Executive Committee for taking this unusual step of using our surplus, our annual surplus, to allocate it to a critical emergency that is happening on the streets of the City of Toronto. You've all seen the headlines about the number of fatalities, and if you're like me, and I hope you haven't been, you've probably had to speak to the families of people who've been lost on our streets, or in some cases, even the drivers of the vehicle. As you know, the City of Toronto has been undergoing enormous changes. The number of people using our streets is increasing, but the design of the streets hasn't been changed to accommodate both that increase and the changes in the modes that people are traveling around our streets. And as a result, far too often, lives are cut short. I completely and wholeheartedly endorse the remarks that the Mayor made when he announced that he wanted to undergo this initiative of allocating the extra $13 million. We must do everything in our power as quickly as we can to make our streets safer. And I accept that challenge, Mr. Mayor, and I want to contribute to it. And I thank you for bringing that to the Executive. It's an unusual move. It's something I haven't seen in years, as you know, the pressures to keep expenditures down have kept us from dealing with some of the critical challenges in the City of Toronto. This is, I think, what our constituents, what the people of Toronto expect of us. Almost everyone I know in my ward knows somebody who's either been seriously injured or has died on the streets of Toronto because we put off dealing with this challenge for too long. These three items that I put in front of you, two of them speak to long-standing problems that have got in the way of our ability to rectify the problem on a routine basis. And that's where we really want to get to, where we don't have to have a debate about every 100 meters of every street in the City of Toronto, but we build it in routinely that when we're reconstructing our roads or designing them to accommodate our emergency vehicles, we have the capacity to actually design for safety. And that's what I'm trying to do here. The specific intersection that I've talked about here is one of the most notorious and dangerous anywhere in the City of Toronto, and the amount I'm allocating here gives staff the option of doing the more thorough and more safe design that the community has put forward. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Councillor Doucette, 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Perks, for this motion. The intersection at DuPont, Dundas, Annette, and that little West Toronto street. Please, can you explain to me, because I've been hearing about this, because that is actually an intersection which will be coming within my ward. Am I correct that there was a study done by some students at some point in time? Can you give me some history on this one?
So in 2004, there was a cycling fatality from a cyclist who was traveling along Annette and was going through that underpass to DuPont. And members of the community were very upset. Since then, further along Dundas, there's been another cycling fatality. And if I recall correctly, the mayor and the chair of the Works Committee announced the first senior safety zone just a little bit further down the road at Dundas and Bloor. So this is one of the most notoriously dangerous stretches anywhere in the city of Toronto. And the community has been very concerned. A few years ago, leadership from that community challenged the University of Toronto Engineering Department to provide some advice on what to do. And I and an official from the city's transportation department were brought in as external advisors for students doing senior engineering theses on how to design that intersection. They all looked at it and they felt that the most important move was to reconfigure the intersection. If you know it, Dundas bends, Old Weston comes in, Annette bends, and there's also an on-ramp that goes down into the underpass and then connects on Dundas. So you have 6 pieces of road all converging. There's a cycling lane there. There's a sidewalk crossing where you literally have to stand on an island in the middle of 3 streets with different traffic lights trying to instruct you where to go. And so the students looked at it and they made a proposal to square the intersection up and reconfigure it. Because the City of Toronto transportation staff were part of the consultative panel, the City of Toronto transportation staff have done some design work. And they've said there are 2 options really, one that costs about $2 million and one that costs about $10 million for how to handle it. The $2 million one closes off Old Weston and changes some paint and wouldn't fundamentally make the intersection safer. The $10 million version actually does what the engineering department at the University of Toronto advised us to do, which is to change the grade and angle of the underpass to get rid of the on-ramp, square the intersection up so it becomes much more standard intersection so that cyclists, pedestrians, and people driving their cars all have a clearer idea of how to get through this absolutely
Thank you.
dangerous
Thank you.
intersection.
You're over 3 minutes.
Thank you.
No, sorry. Well, Councillor Robinson, 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Yeah, I'd like to understand better what you mean by number 1. I think you've heard the general manager and myself speak on this multiple times, where when we're rebuilding and reconstructing any street in Toronto, we use a Vision Zero lens, a road safety lens. So that is in the DNA of our transportation staff, and we have a full team of Vision Zero staff dedicated to ensuring that. So I'm not sure what you're insinuating with this motion.
Far from it. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I am aware that we have Vision Zero staff who work on this kind of thing, but they work in selected spots. So, for example, recently at High Park Avenue and Indian Road, I was able to get some changes done when there was a reconstruction. But it doesn't happen in every case. It does not happen in every case. It happens selectively, and it happens based on the time and availability of Vision Zero staff within the transportation department. What I am trying to achieve here, and I have consulted with the general manager of transportation in designing this motion, is that we bring in some external advice so that it becomes automatic for every single iteration of a contract. Part of the problem is here that we purchase contract services for the year and they will just resurface away as they get through the volume. but there's no automatic piece that looks at every single instance to attempt to do this. This is to give the staff some more support so they can build that into contract language, which we currently don't do.
So that is not my understanding. What I've been told multiple times is that this is now part and parcel of who they are. Every director has their marching orders. Every city staffer in transportation is dedicated and committed to using the Vision Zero lens no matter what the construction project is. And that is happening not just really in transportation, but also in engineering services and construction services.
So I appreciate that that's your understanding. My understanding, and this is based on working with staff to develop this motion, my understanding is that when we're doing some kind of significant project, a new project, Eglinton Connects, or the intersection that I just discussed, the DuPont, Dundas, Annette, Old West intersection, absolutely a Vision Zero lens is applied. Where it is not applied is in the tendering of our routine reconstruction and resurfacing contracts, where the norm is still to replace like for like.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to build a little bit on Councillor Robinson's questions about the necessity to conduct, or what is the exact thing that you're asking to be conducted onto local road, let's say a local road resurfacing?
So it's not that I'm directing any money to deal with a specific road resurfacing aside from the one that's the third point in my motion.
Right.
What I'm asking for is to provide some resources, a modest amount of money, $500,000 one time, to enable our transportation staff to bring in some outside expertise to look at, for example, best practices in other places in terms of how we do contract design for when we tender out the routine road resurfacing reconstruction, to give us the flexibility or the contract design tools so that we're not simply replacing like for like, but we're replacing what's there with something safer in every instance that's possible.
Got it. So a lot of road resurfacing, you know, in my ward is quiet residential streets, maybe 100 cars a day, 6-meter pavement width, ditches on either side. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of room for improvement. So why would, given there's a large percentage of road resurfacing or surfaces like that, why would we want to spend money on looking at something that has little chance to be changed? Maybe that money would be used in another way, in a better way.
So two points I want to make to that. I think, as the mayor said in his remarks when he announced Vision Zero, we have to look at everything. We have to take every conceivable measure here. And I agree with that sentiment. The second point I was taking your example of a quiet residential street, the designs for quiet residential streets vary widely. For example, there's the Dutch Wohlerf model, which designs the street very differently from how we design our residential streets, our quiet residential streets, to make them much safer than the standard we build to here in the City of Toronto. So I think it's a vital tool for us to look beyond our own experience, to bring in some expertise who have not been doing it the same way for 20 years, but maybe are aware of approaches that have been taken in the Netherlands or in Germany or in England, and to get some advice so that we are not simply replacing the unsafe like with another unsafe like, but maybe designing our contracts so we do better in every instance.
So what does that have to do with road resurfacing? Like, I get the idea of changing a street.
If you're going to spend
resurfacing, you're taking the top layer of asphalt on and you're putting a new one down, and maybe
you put in something. Maybe you put in something that's textured. Maybe you put different paint back. Maybe you narrow it. Maybe you widen the sidewalk. There are all kinds of options.
All right.
The point is that you and I don't know the answers. We've had a system that just keeps replacing like for like. Let's go get better advice than we've had so far.
His staff has the motion.
I see. Thank you. I'm at 3 minutes, right? I can go more.
Yes, sorry. Sorry, I was speaking to the clerk. Councillor Fragadakis. 3 minutes clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Councillor Perks, a road in my ward is actually being resurfaced this year in July, starting in July, and there was no discussion about changes to improve the safety. So I actually had to call a meeting just to get them to consider it, and part of this resurfacing actually covers a very problematic intersection. You may know it. It's near the entrance to the Don Valley Parkway at Don Lands and O'Connor.
Oh, yes.
I was wondering,
well aware of that.
would your first motion address situations like that?
The entire purpose of my first motion is to give the Transportation Department a little bit of extra resources so that it becomes routine, that when intersections or pieces of road are done, such as the one you mentioned, we don't have to wait until the community expresses concern or a local councillor catches it, but it just becomes a routine part of how we design it right into our contract, that whenever that kind of work is taking place, this lens is applied.
Great, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I applaud the councillor for his effort. Why 500,000?
That was my best guess in conversation with the Transportation Department. If we spend less than that, as happens with capital programs, and this would be funded through a capital program because it's one-time consulting expertise in capital program design, if we spend less, then the money just returns to the capital reserve fund.
No, I get that, but why? I mean, how was that number chosen as opposed to 250,000 or 750,000?
It was my best guess based on 12 years of looking at city budgets and seeing what consulting expertise is necessary to help us.
Round number, okay.
Yeah.
And when is that to be spent?
Well, my hope is that it would be spent this year, but Councillor, as you know, when we have capital projects that aren't completed within the year, they sometimes can roll over into the next year. The way I've designed this motion and the other two parts is to make sure, and I think this is an important principle when we're allocating one-time surplus money, that these are one-time projects.
Okay, so you've asked for it to be spent.
Yeah.
Hired, but you haven't said how it's to report out. I mean, which would have been helpful if it had reported out to, our committee with Councillor Robinson, and you haven't said how it's to be reported out or given a timeline. That's just a comment. Sorry. On 3.
Well, I can address that very quickly in 10 seconds. Sure. So we're coming to the end of the term. There's no way it could report to the next PWIC. It will be up to the next council how they want to manage the flow of information from staff to committee.
Sorry, and it's a point of clarification. So what we're trying to do is address parts of the city. We're trying to find means by which we can make roads safer so pedestrians and cyclists are not getting killed. Why did you choose Dundas, Annette, Dupont? I know that area very well. Why that, of all of the problematic areas in the city, why that area?
So there are two reasons I chose it. One,
it's not that dangerous. How many people? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there are two reasons I chose that. One is it's already in process.
Okay.
So staff have begun work on it. In fact, Councillor Bailao and I are holding a public meeting in about 2 weeks. The preliminary work staff have shown me have given us that they're going to want to take two options to the community. Staff have also told me that within their regular budget, they can afford one of the options, which doesn't do very much to the intersection. But if we wanted to do the bigger work, we might have to wait a decade, which means we would do the intersection twice in a decade, which is a waste of money.
So, okay, so I'm just trying to stick to questions of clarification. So is this an unsafe area statistically?
I haven't pulled statistics. I can tell you in 2004 there was a cyclist killed there. This year, half a block south, there was a cyclist killed there. 2 blocks south of there, which is where the mayor and the chair of the Works Committee launched the Senior Safety Zone program. There have been people killed there. And anyone who's ever experienced the intersection knows it is simply unsafe.
Thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillor, during the budget process, and you probably will remember, you've been incredibly critical and have been critical on using reserves to balance our budget, depleting the reserves for one-off items. Isn't this motion really about you using one-time reserves to jump the priority queue to get some things done in your ward?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not, Councillor, and I'm quite concerned that you would represent that with that question.
Why?
Here's what's happening. Instead of drawing down a reserve in order to keep property taxes low, which is what your budgets have done, what I have done here is to take a surplus, part of a surplus of $297 million, which is 6 times what the CFO had budgeted as necessary for going into our capital program, and said, given that we have come across this one-time windfall, given further that the Mayor of Toronto has said that in response to enormous public outcry, we should take the windfall and apply $13 million of that to dealing with a crisis in our community, I've found a couple of ways to enhance that, which I happen to know more about because of my direct experience with problems in my ward.
So if, we got $190 million that's going to the capital reserve. Now, what staff have said, there is a huge list of priorities that this money, in fact, this money is, there's more capital reserve work that needs to be done that this money is going to be doing. Can you imagine if every councillor, and my question to you is, what would happen if every councillor after you has the same similar motion that's going to deplete that 190 down to probably 0? Is that the appropriate kind of direction we should be giving our staff when we're looking at trying to bring the reserves to a proper amount to be able to do the work we need to do?
So I have 2 comments in terms of that. The first is that, as the CFO said, we have a $500 million program over the next 10 years based on $50 million a year going in from surplus. This year we have a windfall that greatly outstrips that. So we have a moment to act. The second thing I would say to you is, my answer to your question depends on whether or not you take the mayor at his word. The mayor said publicly, and I agree with him, that we are in a moment of crisis and that we need to do everything we can to make our streets safe. If you're aware of an unsafe street in your ward where an action could be taken on one-time windfall money to make it safer, and you agree with what the mayor said, I would look forward to your motion and I would vote for it.
So you seem to think that this $190 million or the 297 is kind of windfall money, that it's free money that we have the ability just to spend any way you want, regardless of all the other priorities that this city have. And I recognize that Vision Zero is a priority, and I will be supporting that $13 million. But you seem to think that this is free money?
No, I don't think it's free money. I think it's one-time money.
You said that.
No, I said windfall.
Windfall.
Yes, it is a windfall. It is unexpected, and just like the mayor has said that we have an unexpected surplus, so we should allocate it to a crisis in our community. I'm saying, well done, Mr. Mayor. I'm with you. Here's another way to help, and I would encourage you to do the same.
Good for you. Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. I just had a question about number 2. And so you're looking for to undertake or retain a consultant to undertake a study of the availability and suitability of smaller fire trucks.
Yes.
Right? So why are you limiting it just to fire trucks? What about solid waste trucks as they use in Asia? Smaller trucks like that, or?
That's a very good point. I know that for a number of projects that we've had in the City of Toronto, most recently with Eglinton Connects, it's been the emergency service consideration that has forced us to widen lanes more than we would see even in our own streets downtown. So if you have additional thoughts on that, then I would be happy to support them as well.
Okay, so I'll think about moving something maybe for the other emergency vehicles and solid waste, because I
look forward to it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, amend it.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry, we're not at questions, we're at speakers. Oh, you mean to Councillor Perks. Okay, sorry. Councillor Davis, question.
Just to clarify, I think you also heard the answer of our finance staff that about $50 million of this additional money going into the capital reserve is in the budget, but the rest is not. So this additional funding is really not tied in any way, which is why you are attempting to use it for other priorities. Is that correct?
Yes, and to enhance on that, I want to pick up on something else the CFO said, that with the allocation of surplus, it's about the elected body, us, Toronto City Council, deciding what the priorities are. He was challenged to try to provide us with advice on it, and his answer to the councillor was, no, that's properly within the purview of City Council to decide what the most pressing uses of public money are. And as I said in answer to some of the other questions, the Mayor very clearly said just recently that this crisis, this is the one that we need to turn our minds to right now. We have a once-in-a-decade opportunity of a combination of political will, a moment when our budget generated a much larger surplus than we expected. We have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to lead on an issue that Torontonians are critically concerned about, and I'm encouraging all of us to take full advantage of this moment.
And that's because our municipal land transfer tax earned $95 million more than anticipated, is that correct?
That's a portion of it, yes.
And our investments generated $16 million more than we had anticipated. Those alone, over $100 million, just from our prudent investments.
Yes, we've always managed as a government to outstrip the private industry players in the bond market and investment market, and something I'm very proud of, and I think that Mr. Farag should be thanked more often than he is.
And so when we have benefited from these, in these ways, we should look at whether or not to simply put it all in reserve, or whether or not we should invest in priorities.
Well, I think there are two tests. The first test when making an allocation like this is to recognize that you should match one-time money with one-time expenses. And I've been very careful to do that. I don't want to, and this is partly in response to something Councillor Crawford said, where I've been critical is where we use reserves to balance recurring expenses, ongoing operating budget costs. But the Budget Committee did that, and I was starkly critical because it's wrong. Here what I'm trying to do is to match a one-time revenue to a one-time expense so we don't create an ongoing operating problem as the Budget Committee has done in the last 4 budgets.
Thank you. Time's up. Councillor Palacio, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Perks, and you mentioned that you are planning to have a public meeting in your ward as well as with Councillor Bailao. In terms of public consultation, that part of town will be Ward 16. That's part of my riding as well. Have you made any effort of contacting anyone else when I'm just trying to understand
I'm sorry, you said that this is going to be your ward?
Well, that session is going to be part
Well, Councillor, I'm afraid I have to differ with you on that. That the only capacity that members of City Council are able to do this kind of consultation on is based on the wards they represent. Now, you may want to represent this part of the City of Toronto in the future, but it would be absolutely inappropriate for City staff to bring a candidate for a new ward to a public consultation. That would be way over the line.
Well, that's, don't you think that's
a little bit presumptuous,
so parochial that it's just your corner only? You are not seeing the community as a whole. If you're talking about community safety and the health and safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and everyone else, we have to be a little bit more open-minded and just to look at our communities as a whole. And when you see community leaders who are representing those areas that have to be part of the process, I don't understand your rationale.
Well, I'm afraid that the reason you don't understand is that you're not correctly informed in this instance. The reason why...
Councillor Perks, I'm sorry, but you need to apologize for that.
No, you don't have to apologize for someone who's being misinformed.
That's not necessary.
If I had said that he was informed and was saying something untrue, then I would apologize. I have been including community leaders. I have been, and that's actually why Councillor Bailao has been involved, because as you said, there is a cycling connection through here. Councillor Bailao has taken tremendous leadership in trying to think about how that cycling path and the proposals to extend the cycling path on Bloor. I'm not finished my answer, Councillor. So I have included those community leaders who have been following this issue, and if you're unaware...
Thank you, thank you. That's... Pardon? Point of privilege, Councillor Robinson.
So you
Yes,
asked-
sorry, Councillor Palacio.
You
Pardon?
asked the councillor to
Yeah.
apologize, and he did not. So I'm not understanding the standardization of this. So you asked the councillor to apologize. He did not apologize.
And then both of them started debating, and I did ask Councillor Perks to apologize for the comment.
Can you ask me specifically what it is I've said wrong and I need to apologize for?
Well, I don't have word by word, but I think that the comment you made to Councillor Palacio was in the council chambers was very inappropriate. As far as the next coming election, I think that was inappropriate. So, Councillor Perks, would you please apologize?
I want to make sure I can have my...
Yeah.
Now he's going to talk.
So you want me to apologize for saying to Councillor Palacio that I'm working with the actual elected official for the area rather than a potential candidate for the area. Is that what you want me to apologize for?
You made other comments as well.
That he was misinformed?
I don't have the word by word.
I just want to make sure I know what I'm
Yeah.
apologizing for because I don't want to give a disingenuous apology.
So, Councillor Perks, can you please apologize?
I am sorry. I am sorry for those portions of my remarks that stepped outside parliamentary tradition.
We'll get word by word. Okay, do we, before we go to the next, no? Okay, so let's recess to 2 o'clock.